Okay, so in this video, I'm going to train you on 5S, which is a workplace organizational system that was developed by the Toyota Motor Company. And the reason that it was developed and formalized is because Toyota saw that there was a lot of inherent waste in an unorganized workplace. So they were really, in typical Toyota form, they developed a system that addressed this problem. Now, you might think that organizing your workplace is just an action and everybody just knows how to do it. But what Toyota did is they took it to another level and they defined these 5 tools or these 5 different steps that is the best way that they could come up with to make sure that you not only did it right, but that it was going to be part of your actual operation system and last forever. So what's coming up next is I'm going to go ahead and train you on the 5S system, but also at the end, we're going to spend some time talking about human behaviors and my experience with implementing 5S and some of the pitfalls that I'm going to recommend that you look out for. All right, so I'm ready to get started. I hope you are, and we're going to start on the very first S, which is sort. Now, as you can imagine, this is where you're going to go through and sort things out of your work area, especially the things that don't belong. Now, there's a few ways to do this. One would be the real quick, easy way of just going through and picking things out, but I don't really want to suggest that you do it the easy way. I'm going to tell you what I think is the very best way. And what I've done in my past with great success is I've had everybody just go pull everything out of their workstation. So let's say you have a department and you've got tables and workstations and equipment or just stuff laying around your work area, right? If you can find a place to drag everything that's not bolted to the building and you put that in another area, maybe there's a outside yard or a empty parking lot or something that you can pull this out to, or maybe there's an extra room nearby that you can pack everything into temporarily. So now what you've got is you've actually touched and pulled everything out. And your job now is to sort everything out that does not really belong in the workplace. And you need to be kind of critical and in your thinking on this. And I know that there's things in your work area that you may have grown attached to or you like or it just has happened to just end up being there. But the whole purpose of doing this is to isolate only what's needed for your actual work that you need to do. And so you get that separated, and then you're going to be left with some stuff that is maybe a variety of things. Some of it might just need to go out to the curb. It might just be trash. So, obviously, you just take care of that and get that put in the trash. There might be some other things that, you kind of need to keep, but they're not really part of your work area. And we'll discuss what to do with that stuff later. But at this point, it's just about sorting all of this stuff out. Now, this step always brings me back to my childhood, and my dad would have me go out and clean the garage quite often. And the way I would have to do it is I'd go out and open up the big garage door and pull everything out of the garage. And at this point, obviously there were some things in there that are normal garage type things like lawn mowers or toolboxes or things like that. But I'd also find a bunch of stuff that collected in the garage over the course of time that really didn't need to be there. So this is a great time to, put some trash that may have found its way into the garage or your workspace in a bag and get that put in the trash. Maybe there's some things that, you just kind of said, I'm going to hold on to and I'll get to it someday. And you just never quite have gotten to it. So there's those kind of things. And then there's just the things that are just broken and need to be put in the trash just because they're not necessary to be in your workspace. So sorting all that stuff out is what we're going to do in this step. Now, this is probably my favorite part of 5S, and it's the second S that's called set or set in order. And I like this because you get to use a lot of creativity and it really starts to kind of, make things start to come to shape a little bit better than what they would if you were just doing your normal tidying up. All right, so now that you've done your sorting operation and you've identified the things that do need to come back in the work area, you're going to bring it back in the order that is kind of prioritized by how often you use it or the frequency in which you use it. So let me tell you what I mean by that. if you use something almost all the time throughout the day, obviously that's something you want to put close to your proximity in your work area so you can get to it really quickly and easily. Now, the less frequent you're going to use that item, you're going to start moving it a little further and further away from your immediate workstation. Now, that just kind of makes sense, I think, to most people. But if you were to go look around most work areas, not a lot of people really think of things in that way, and not a lot of people practice it that way. So, even though it's natural in most people's mind, if you think about maybe your kitchen at home, you have your spices in a spice rack or a cabinet, and your utilities somewhere else, and your pots and pans someplace else. And you don't necessarily have all your spices and utilities and pots and pans sitting out on your counter all the time, right, in your immediate workspace, right? You have them stored depending on your need to access them, and they're probably organized in a way that makes sense. So make sure that you follow that through into your workspace. So bringing everything in and placing it in proximity to you based on the frequency of use is the first thing that you do. Now, here's the really cool part. I want you to make sure that when you set everything in place, you're thinking about what location makes the most sense in having a efficiently laid out workstation. And then this is the most important part: label it. Make sure there is something that's indicating that that item goes in that place and that everybody can clearly see that that's what the intention is. So a real simple way of doing it is just what I just said, is putting a label right on it. You might have like a label maker in your company, or if you don't, one thing that I do a lot is I'll get on the computer and I'll just print out a little piece of paper with that word on it and cut out the rectangle outside of it and take some clear tape and tape that down into the workstation, and that works just fine. So that's a really effective way to do it. A couple of other ways of doing it I really like to do as well, and this can really add that extra level of organization, is either putting some type of a shadow box around where that is with some tape or some paint, or just some type of a marking system, or even going a step further and tracing that exact shape right where it needs to go. So, for instance, if you've got some scissors that you want to keep in your work area and you decide that they're going to be kept right in a certain spot, of course, you would print out a label that says scissors and put it right where it needs to be. And then you could either make a rectangle for on the tabletop for them to sit in, or you could actually just trace the entire handle and the blades and make it look obvious that that's where scissors go. That's a really good visual indicator to anybody that that's where something particular needs to go. So I am a really huge fan of doing this. Do it everywhere you possibly can, whether it be on your workbench or hanging up. If you've ever been in a garage where people are really, really organized, you'll see like pegboards and you'll see tools hanging up there. And I've even seen some people just like kind of do some black paint silhouette behind the shovels and the rakes and stuff like that. That is a really good example of doing this type of activity, and it's hugely effective. This also takes me back to one of the first lessons that I remember my teacher taught me about 5S a long time ago, before I really got into like the formal training part of it. But I was out on the production floor working with a team, and I was trying to help them solve some of their problems. And one of the problems that we identified that they had was there were a group of people that they all needed to do what's called changing over their machine, which meant they were to take apart a nut and bolt system and change a fixture out and put a new fixture on. Well, they had to use this special wrench, and it was quite large and probably maybe a little expensive, I'm not sure. But they only had one wrench and multiple machines and multiple people that needed to share the wrench. Well, the problem that we all agreed on and observed was it was quite annoying, and people had to spend a lot of time looking for this wrench because nobody ever really, put it back where they found it. And even if they did, not everybody knew where the last person put it back. So, my idea at the time was I was just going to buy a bunch of wrenches for everybody. So as I was shopping for wrenches, and my teacher kind of noticed that I was doing that, he decided to go out and teach us a lesson on the second S of setting in order. And he got the team together and he asked everybody where they would agree that the best place to store that single wrench was. And they identified right there next to where the fixtures are being kept on this racking system. And the rack happened to have a wooden surface that the fixtures sat on. So everybody said that's where they wanted to put it. So he took a Sharpie marker out of his pocket and he put the wrench there and he traced a silhouette of that wrench right there on the wooden bench. And now this wrench actually had two ends to it, and one was like an open end C shape, and the other one was a closed end circle. And he went through and he actually traced out the C on one side and the circle on the other, and set the wrench there and said, okay, then this is kind of simple. We just want to replace this wrench in this spot. I'll tell you, every time I walked by that area, I always saw that wrench not only sitting there, but it was in the exact location or in the exact right rotation for the open end and the closed end. So it was really amazing to me that I was thinking I was solving a problem by just, buying more stuff, which I think would have probably added to some of the clutter of the work area because there would just be wrenches everywhere and people would lose them and we'd always have to just buy more, or just addressing kind of the root cause. And that's that there was no really location for the employees to know to put that wrench back. So it was a very effective lesson for me. And believe me, if you do that in your workstation, you're going to always know where things belong. And everybody that comes into your workstation will clearly understand that as well. So setting is so much fun and it's a very effective tool. You can get creative with it and, come up with your own fun ways to identify where an item needs to be stored in your workstation and have a good time with it. All right, so the third S is something called shine, and that's just where you're simply going to go through and shine everything up. Now that you've gotten all the garbage out of your workspace and you know where everything belongs, you want to make sure that when you bring it back in your workplace, it's in a nice, clean, as close to new condition as you can clean it up to be. This also means you might need to take this opportunity to replace some things that might have been worn down or need to be replaced. But the idea is, now you've got this nice organized workstation. You don't want to have it all grimy and cruddy and dirty. This also goes for the actual canvas that you're working with, right? So after we've drug everything out in the very first sort stage, that's a great time to go through and sweep and mop and maybe paint some things up and get things looking in really new conditions so that you can just kind of have a new workplace when you get this all finalized. So these first three S's were kind of like, kind of obvious. I think sorting things out and putting them in the right place and cleaning them, I think that's kind of just self-explanatory, and you've probably done this type of activity in the past anyway, right? So I'm sure it's not something that just really blew you away and go, oh my gosh, I never thought of doing that. So those are really just the preliminary steps to get you into a good condition. And what we're going to do next is we're going to go into the fourth and fifth S, which is going to be more of a formalized system to make sure that you're always continuously maintaining and that it stays in the condition that you expect it to stay, so we can have, maximum longevity of this exercise. So the fourth S is something called standardize. And this is where we're going to get a little bit into the Toyota type methodologies. And I like to think of standardize in kind of two different segments. One is creating that to be the standard. And then the other standardized way is to look for ways that you can kind of copy and paste that and standardize it throughout your company. So firstly, you want to establish what you've gone through in your first three S's into some type of a training document and make sure that everybody knows that that's the standard expectation that we're intending to get back into that condition on a regular basis. If not always throughout the day, which is best case scenario, at least making sure that once a day, beginning, end, or both, you're getting it back into the original condition, and you don't ever want to just let it drift away for too long. Otherwise, it's just going to go back into like a messy situation. So Standardizing it by I would say taking some good pictures of the work area and getting everybody to understand this is what the good 5S condition looks like, and incorporate that into some type of work instruction or SOP. That way it's always kind of kind of kept in record forever, and anybody can clearly go back and reference that for training or just retraining, and just knowing that that is the standard expectation for that work area to look like. And then you can also take a look around, and maybe you have some duplicate workstations in your area, or when you're doing this whole operation, it's not a really good idea to have identical workstations kind of be set up differently. And there's a lot of good reasons for that that we can get into in some standardization training later. But really, if you think about it, you want to be able to have your workstation set up to be the best that you can kind of imagine them to be, and then copy and paste that best scenario amongst all of the similar workstations, right? So that's the idea there, is to make sure that it's standardized throughout the same type of workstations within your company. You can also look outside of that particular or that specific department, and you might have some good ideas that you've implemented in that department that other departments could benefit from. Maybe you might be working in like a shipping department, and there might be more of an office environment that could benefit from your creative ideas that are working for you. So that's another way to standardize across your company. All right, so here's the big one. This is the big one, everybody. Fifth step, fifth S is sustain. All right, so this is kind of where everything could possibly go wrong, is if you've gone through all this hard work and all this effort to do the first four S's of sorting, setting, shining, standardizing, and then you don't sustain it. And how many times do you think this has happened to a group of people? I can tell you far too often, right? So really, this is about making sure that you have the discipline and the commitment, and you really believe in maintaining and sustaining this activity that we've done, and creating it into a system that lives on forever. So in order to do that, we have to do a couple of extra things. And it's really up to you, and you can use, again, your creativity to determine what will work best in your team. But one thing that I can suggest that I've really seen work in my past is by creating some type of a 5S audit, and to do that audit on a regular basis. Now, you can choose whether it be once a week or once a month or every quarter or something like that. But you really want to schedule it and really adhere to that schedule, and really do those audits, because if you just forget about it, there's a high chance that after time, things are just going to drift away, and people, how people are, they think, okay, well, that was just kind of a flavor of the month thing, and we went through and we did 5S, but I'm just going to let things creep back into being a little bit complacent, and just having clutter and mess everywhere. So developing a 5S audit is a good way to defend against something like that happening. And this is where you would take a sheet of paper, get on the computer and make put some questions on that piece of paper, like is everything labeled, and have yes or no. And obviously, if there's everything is labeled, then you've passed that portion. Is everything cleaned up? Is there any clutter in the area that shouldn't belong? Is anything in bad condition, or needs to be replaced? So come up with a creative list for what an audit would look like. And then that way, the team knows that this is something that is going to be revisited, and we're serious about doing this. Now, you can turn it into a real fun, positive exercise as well. I've seen a lot of companies do like 5S competitions, and the winner gets some type of a prize or a trophy or reward or acknowledgement, something like that. So that turns this into more of a positive versus a negative, where people feel like they're being judged and beat up for not performing. Look at the positive side of it. Turn that into a good spin for that. Also, making sure, and this is really important, and this might also go into the standard, but it's definitely important for the sustain. It's really important to make sure that your entire team has been given the time and the supplies and equipment to maintain the 5S condition. So in other words, you're not going to be able to make sure that your work area is always in good condition if you're not given the time to do it. So a lot of times people, companies will say, the last 10 or 15 minutes of your workday is the time to go through and clean up and get everything back into your good 5S condition. Also making sure that they have, your brooms and your mops and your rags and your cleaning solvents and things like that. And don't forget, those are also things that need to be kept in a good 5S condition. So have yourself a really nice locker or closet somewhere, and do like I said with the pegboard, and have them be able to hang up the brooms and have a shadow box there, and have trace out the broom. That's perfect to do. Have a label and say that that's where the brooms go. Your mop buckets, put those on the floor, and that's a great spot to get some floor tape and tape out a little square and label the word mop. You can even do that with a magic marker. And that way everybody knows that's exactly where a mop belongs. So, that's kind of what we need to do to make sure that we are taking this system really seriously and put a lot of focus into that sustained step. And this is really super critical, not only for the employees to do, but this is really something that needs to get into the management system, because really this is something that we want to incorporate into the expectations for the company's workforce to participate in. So management really needs to embrace this and take charge of making sure that those audits are put in place. All right. So the good news is we just went through the 5S training, and I don't think it's really that hard of a system to grasp and understand, right? I think probably, like I said, the hardest part is the fifth S, which is sustaining it. But, throughout my career, as I've been training teams on 5S, one of the things that I've noticed is nobody ever really pushes back and says that's a bad idea. It makes sense to most people. I mean, it really doesn't make any sense to say, yeah, I think we should have a really cluttered, disorganized workplace with a bunch of stuff in it that really doesn't belong there, and I just want to trip over stuff all day. That just doesn't make sense, and I don't think anybody really thinks that it does. So if everybody agrees that we want to do this, then I always ask myself, why are there so many companies and teams that don't participate in this or don't do it naturally? And I think a lot of that really comes down to not recognizing human behavior and not recognizing that we need to do something that influences people's behavior. I always say that people are motivated either internally or externally. And that kind of means that everybody has a different personality, right? Everybody has different behaviors or different comfort levels of how they like to behave or act. And there are some people that are just really, really organized, and they have everything in their life alphabetized and color coded and just put away neatly so. And then there's other people that are the exact opposite, which, that looks like a tornado just blew through their life, and they've got papers everywhere, and, clutter everywhere, and that's just their normal operating mode. So it doesn't make any sense to expect for a group of people to come into a workplace and all behave one way without some type of external motivation, right? So that's where I think most companies go wrong. And what we're doing right now is training you and teaching you that we do want to do some type of an external motivation to get everybody into the condition that we all agree is best to work in, when that's a nice, organized, clean, and orderly workplace. So that means when we go through this, even you folks that normally live in an environment where it looks like a tornado went through it, you understand why it's important for all of us to work together in this system so that we can enjoy the benefits of having an organized workplace. So, what are some of the benefits of having an organized workplace? How much time do you think you've spent in your day looking for something that should have been in your workplace and it just drifted away? Just like I was talking about with the wrench earlier, right? So those are just a whole bunch of different opportunities for things to go wrong if you don't have good organization. But if you do, you can guarantee that when you go to reach for something and you need it, it's going to be there and you don't have to go searching around for it. So greatly improves employee productivity and efficiency and just stops people from wasting their time doing something that doesn't add any value. Another thing that having a good 5S system does is it reduces the chances of making a mistake or an error. So if you think about it, by having a cluttered workspace, you are really very distracted, and there's a lot of things that are around you that you really don't need, and it's kind of distracting you from understanding and focusing on what's really important. So for instance, have you ever been working and you sat something down on your workstation and you meant to get back to it later and you just forgot to and you didn't? Well, if your workstation is full of just little things that don't belong there, then it's kind of easy just to let it be kind of out of sight, out of mind because it just blends in with the clutter. But if you have just a perfectly organized workplace and you only have things on your workstation that belong there, if you set something down that's kind of out of the ordinary, and especially if you go back through at the end of the day and make sure that you're in good 5S condition, and if you have a designated place for everything and you look to make sure that everything is sitting in its place, you're going to notice that something abnormal was set in your work area and it's going to, remind you to get back to it. But it is just a really true fact that if you have a cluttered work area, it's going to clutter your mind, clutter your attention. If you have a very clean and organized workstation, you can focus and get your job done much more effectively and with higher level of quality. And that's really one of the things that the 5S, especially the second S, does for you is it identifies very quickly and very easily if something abnormal has happened in your workplace. So if everything is laid out and everything is in its normal condition, it's very easy to see. I've got that there and this is sitting there and everything is just so. If something is missing or if something extra happens, let's say you're going through and you're packing things up, right? And you're supposed to pack 3 things into a box and send that box to the customer. If you miss one and 2 things go in that box and you move it on and you have a really neat and organized work area, then you have obviously 1 thing that's left and you'll know immediately that you need to get that problem fixed. If you have 100 things sitting on your desk, or let's be real, if you have a dozen things sitting on your desk and you forgot to put one of those 3 items in the box, and the 2 go to the customer, and now you have 1 piece that is sitting out there amongst 12 other things, it's going to blend into the background and you're going to miss it and maybe never see it or not see it for a long time, and you're going to 2 weeks later go, I wonder what this is and where this belongs. So it's really important, and I think it's really a huge help to make sure that your workstation is always kept in really neat, orderly condition. So another thing that 5S does for you is its improvement in safety. So normally when people get hurt at work, it's because something abnormal happened that you didn't plan on. Well, if you have a whole bunch of clutter and a whole bunch of extra things in your workplace, that just amplifies the percentage of a chance that things are going to go wrong. So, I mean, think about a trip and fall. There might be boxes or extension cords or just things cluttering up your work area that you're going to trip over and hurt yourself. That's what 5S does, is it makes sure that you don't have any of those hazards, those extra things in your work area that you could possibly trip over. Or maybe we're talking about a sharp blade on your workstation that it's not supposed to be there. It doesn't have a good safe storage location. Another thing that 5S does that's a great thing for companies is it really does affect employee morale. Most people, I'd say even probably all people, really don't enjoy going into work and kind of working in a disgusting, gross, unorganized, just really, filthy work area, right? People love going in and feeling like their workplace is in good condition, it's organized, you can always find the things you need, it's clean, it's upbeat, it's happy, it's, someplace that you really want to go to work. So that is a huge reason to take 5S seriously. You might not realize it, but after time, it really does wear away at the human psyche to work in a kind of gross work area. So that's another reason to make sure that 5S is implemented in your work area. One more advantage to having a good 5S system in your company is your outward image to the public or even your clients or your potential clients. Do you really want to have a potential customer come into your work area and see a bunch of garbage on the floor or a tabletop just filled with junk and tools and unnecessary items? Of course not. If people come in and see a company that's in that condition, they're far, far less likely to want to do business with them because it just makes them feel like they really don't have control over their company and their operations. And that's going to be very likely to have a negative effect on them. So think about it for yourself. If you were looking for a company to do business with and you looked at one that was really nice and neat, clean and organized, and you went into another one and it was kind of a pigsty and really disgusting and didn't seem like they were very well organized, which one would you be more likely to go with? I think everybody knows the answer to that. You really don't want to trust a company that doesn't have enough pride in their work area to clean it up and make sure it's organized, because that is going to most likely have a negative effect on what your experience is going to be with them. And you just really want to have a good outward image to the general public. So, one of the things that I always like to ask people to think about is if you were to think about those companies that you have a lot of respect for, or maybe are well known for being very successful. Let's say it's like Apple or Google or Amazon or, Tesla, those types of companies that are really big names. Do you really think you would walk into them and see a whole bunch of clutter? Of course not. So I don't think it's really a coincidence that they have a good workplace organization and they're really successful. So it makes so much sense to me for you guys to make sure that you copy those good habits that successful companies have, because I guarantee you if Apple was a total mess and disorganized and didn't have their systems and their or workplace organization set up correctly, they wouldn't be the successful company that they are today. So it's quite common for lean manufacturing coaches and consultants to say that if you're going to start working towards a lean manufacturing system in your company, the 5S is the best place to start. And there's a few reasons for that. Number one is we would say that if you are not willing to have the discipline to have a good organized workplace, then the other things that we're going to try to implement in lean manufacturing is probably going to be harder than doing that. So starting with the discipline of organizing your workplace is, a good place to get started. The other thing is lean manufacturing is about removing waste from your process and being able to identify when you have a problem and go in and fix it. It's about bringing problems to the surface. So a lot of that starts right with your organization. And that's a really good foundational tool to make sure that you get started by identifying and indicating exactly what the good condition is. And then we can start improving off of that in the future. There's also the cultural aspect of having an organized workplace. If you can remember your first day walking into a company, and if you kind of just looked around and noticed that everything was in disarray and cluttered and in bad 5S condition, then you probably thought, well, okay, this is just the way this company behaves. So you probably adopted that same behavior. Now, some of you are going to really stick to your guns and be extremely organized, but what I find is most of the time, people just kind of blend into what the environment is in their work area. So if we make a concerted effort to go through and do the 5S steps, and a new person walks in, they're going to understand that that's the way that this company behaves. And they're going to be much, much more likely to adopt that behavior And even if they're the tornado type people, they're going to look around and say, well, it looks like everybody puts things back where it belongs. So that's just going to influence their behavior more and more. I can actually remember way back when I very first started working in automotive industry. I was running a machine, and I was had my box of parts complete, and I went to go get it out of the way, and I took it off the table and I set it on the ground. Well, almost immediately, one or two people came running up and said, no, we don't do that. That's not the right place for it. This is where we need to take the parts, and it's in a nice, clearly labeled area, and that's where it goes. So that was really kind of my first experience with the employee culture. It wasn't a boss. It wasn't a manager that came by. It was the actual team members came up and influenced me, because that was what their culture was to keep things in a neat and organized workplace. They just really never questioned it, because it's just what was the norm for them. So having that culture will really have a deep effect on the behavior of your employees, just because it's what everybody else is doing. So I really hope this 5S training has helped you. And most importantly, I really hope that you go out and you implement what I've taught you in your workplace, so that you can enjoy a really organized workplace in your future. I also recommend that when new people come into your company, you have them watch this training video, and that will also help you sustain your 5S system. Because after a while, so many years, people move around or people move on, new people come in, hopefully your company's growing. But if they don't understand that 5S is a system that your company takes very seriously, then they're just really not going to know about it, and it's going to start drifting away. So continuous education and having this type of training available for everybody is really important in 5S. So please incorporate this training into your orientation program.